Jamila, when I was in government, there were two things I noted when I was Home Secretary and when I was working pensions, that the Labour MPs would not support me when I made changes. And in fact, Shabana campaigned against one of the deportation flights.
MP for Hastings and Rye from 2010 to 2019, Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Energy and Home Secretary, Amber Rudd was the fastest rising politician to a great office of state since the Second World War and famously resigned a Conservative whip over Boris Johnson's Brexit deal. She now works in the private sector in energy and cybersecurity and is the co-host of the Crisis Room podcast. We are absolutely delighted to have her with us today on ModCons. Amber, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Amber, you are the co-host of the Crisis Room podcast. Could you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, that's so kind of you to ask, because like most podcasts, I'm always interested in getting new subscribers. We think we've got something different with the crisis room because there are a lot of podcasts about. We've got a politician, a foreign correspondent, and a former CIA agent. So the conceit is three different perspectives from the front, as it were. And each week we look at whatever is the latest foreign policy crisis from our experience to try to draw something new for the public. You can listen to it on any podcast platform, and you can download it for free from Global Player. Sorry for the puff there.
Amazing, amazing. Global Player is fantastic, so that's great. And so now you're one of few people who've seen behind the scenes of one of the country's most notorious departments, the Home Office. How was it
Yes.
following in the footsteps of Theresa May, and what did you want to do differently?
Yes. Well, most Home Secretaries take on their job, take a look around and say, well, the last Home Secretary tried hard, but didn't really tackle the problems. I didn't really have that option since I'd been promoted by the former Home Secretary, and she was indeed Prime Minister. So I wasn't as critical of my predecessor as most Home Secretaries are. And actually, I found Theresa May very helpful. Because the difference was that she understood what the challenges were of the Home Office and so didn't expect miracles. I mean, the Home Office does three things: it does counterterrorism, it does policing, and it does immigration. And my priority at the time was, in fact, counterterrorism, because if you recall, when I was Home Secretary 2016 to 18, terrorism was a real and present issue. And we had a series of terrorist attacks, particularly in 2017, that really made it feel like the country was under attack. So dealing with terrorism, handling, engaging with the public, reassuring the people, but actually taking action to making sure that our security services were supported to bring down these terrible terrorist attacks was my priority. Immigration was always important and always will be important to the UK, both in terms of getting the best people into this country. Let's not be entirely negative about it. Getting it right is one of the great things we can have for growth in this country, but also making sure that we can deliver on what our pledges are. And I feel that is where this government, and to be fair, the last Conservative government went wrong. It's very hard for the public to be told one thing and to see something completely different delivered.
And I think that's the problem with, why people have like not very much faith in politics at the moment. They feel they're not being given it to them straight, or what they're being told is not really the
Yeah, that is definitely a huge problem. But I do also recall that when we did give it to them straight, they didn't really like it.
yeah.
I mean, on Brexit, which I tried to deliver with Theresa May in a way that would support the economy of the country, I was always saying we've got to be straight with the British people. There are trade-offs to have here.
Mm.
And if we do this, there will be consequences. But we might do that, but we need to explain what will happen as a result. And when we did some of that, the public were like, no, no, we don't like that. What
Yeah.
we'd like to hear is that it's all going to be great. And this is one of the problems that politicians have, is that you want to tell the public the truth, but you also want to get elected.
Mm.
And this is also the problem that that Labour have now. They gaily said that they wouldn't raise taxes, and now they're having to do that again and again. So we have to find a way of communicating with the public in a way that doesn't lose politicians' support, that this is more complex than perhaps they would like to expect.
Yeah. Do you think if you say, look, it's going to be tough for the next 3 years, but in 3 years' time, this, and this are going to happen, and then that happens, do you think that kind of thing will shift the public perception or faith
I think
in
that's the
politics?
greatest chance you've got, which is that it's tricky and it's challenging, but the prize is worth it.
Yeah.
And in a way, that's what we did in 2010. We were very much, I mean, I thought that George Osborne was very good at forming the narrative at a budget,
Yeah.
considering we're just in budget week, that has been lacking so far from Labour. And his line was always fix the roof while the sun is shining. We slightly got sad for saying it so much, but fix the roof while the sun is shining and long-term economic plan. So people can take the hardship if that's what you're offering, as long as there is a long-term economic plan. It's still hard though, because in many big debates, referendum and elections, the public will vote for the somebody who sounds like they're just going to be able to offer them more sunshine.
Mm.
And that's part of the problem I think that we have with reform at the moment, where they keep on saying that everybody else is rubbish, we've got all the answers, which is,
Yeah.
for those of us who've been in politics, patently untrue. But it's so tempting to
Yeah.
try them rather than the other guys who've let them down.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you say, you mentioned George Osborne, and you were actually his parliamentary private secretary in 2012. What was that time like, and what are your thoughts on austerity? Was it a mistake, or is it just simply balancing the books?
Well, I think that George Osborne was an exceptional chancellor, and the more chancellors fail, and we've had a few of our own who failed over the
Mm.
past few years as Conservatives, in a way, I think the more it shows that he was very able. And I think the big difference between him and future chancellors, and him and David Cameron getting into government compared to this current government, for instance, is that he and David Cameron really prepared.
Yeah.
And they actually, to our point about signalling to the public that there's going to be difficult choices, I do remember in the run up to the election in 2010 that we did signal that there were going to be cuts. And I know part of the mantra now is that too many cuts, not enough tax raising. And we could have that debate about whether we could have done more about the tax raising and less about the cuts. But the public knew the cuts were coming. I mean, this is why it was so different to this Labour government after last year's election when they didn't say there would be cuts coming. Because I remember in Hastings talking to a few people and they were saying, well, I think the Conservative Party are going to come in and make a whole lot of cuts. It's going to be difficult. And then another person just said, yeah, well, we need to stop spending so much money, don't we? I mean, there was a realization in a large part of the country, particularly a large part of the country had been getting a lot of the money, that we had been living too much on the high, too much money had been coming out. So I think there was a kind of more realistic approach that George Osborne took. And I don't think that austerity was wrong. I do think that um, people felt that the cuts were too harsh, but it's very difficult to counter with should we have put taxes up more instead? I mean, he did put VAT up by 2.5 points from 17.5 to 20, which was a big increase, really, but was very effective at raising money.
Yes, I remember that raise well.
Yeah.
But the spending cuts are important. We can't just keep growing the state. It's not sustainable, especially if everyone lives till they're, 95. It's just not going to work,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
that is correct. We do need to make spending cuts, but of course he did cut welfare at some point, but and his welfare secretary, who was quite a leader in the Conservative Party, Ian Duncan Smith, resigned as a result.
Right.
Nobody likes having their budget cut. It's very hard,
Yeah.
and at the time we were sort of midway making the transfer from all the old benefits to universal credit, so it was particularly difficult for David Cameron that Ian Duncan Smith resigned, but it was an important part of needing to try to keep our spending under control. And of course, we introduced in 2017, was it 17? I think it was somewhere around there, the two-child benefit cap, which remains well supported, but is also quite tricky for people who are not receiving support for their third child.
Yes, yes, and something that looks like it's going to be reversed in the upcoming budget, but
Yeah,
we don't
yeah,
know
which I
just
think
yet.
I don't actually think that that is the most egregious thing. I think it's a problem if you're not reducing the overall welfare budget.
Yeah.
If she comes out and says we're going to reduce the overall welfare budget, and within that we are planning on lifting the two-child benefit cap, then they will get a hearing. But if overall they're taking away the cap, and they're allowing welfare to rise, then I think there's a major problem for the public. And I think the public understand that Labour tried to cut welfare, and the public agree with that, but they failed to do it because their backbenchers wouldn't support them. And as a result, our taxes are going to go up. That's a very bad combination. It just makes them look incompetent, and that they're putting their incompetence on people who've got to pay higher taxes.
Yeah, so you mentioned Ian Duncan Smith, and you were Secretary of State for the Department for Work and Pensions, and fixing issues such as the benefits tapering, and when the universal credit system was quite nascent. And it is now generally regarded as a success, but we do still have 7.52 million people claiming universal credit in the UK. Is this simply a post-COVID consequence, or are there further kinks that need ironing out in the universal credit system?
So I do think universal credit has been a success compared to what came before it. The business of people having to go to 5 or 6 different places, get 5 or 6 different checks, appointments, absolute nightmare. So I think it is a success from that point of view. It will never be, perfect. It needs constant improving and addressing. But it also worked well during COVID when many more people, of course, came onto it. But I think as we came out of COVID, there were changes back to the old system that weren't made that have contributed, it's not the whole thing, but contributed to part of the problem. One of the ones I find absolutely extraordinary is interviews for PIP, which is the additional disability benefit that people with qualifications for those disabilities get, now takes place over the phone. I can't quite get over that over the phone. And there's plenty of YouTube videos which will help you answer the questions correctly, i.e., so you get the extra money. And I think that's just ridiculous. And I think that we should do something to get people back to formal interviews where it's much more difficult to perhaps exaggerate or indeed lie,
Mm.
and where people can challenge them and say, look, you look okay to me. Maybe you should do this, maybe you should do that. Because we're not helping people by allowing so many people to go into disability benefits. And I think it's 1 in 7 18 to 24-year-olds. It's a
Yeah,
shocking number for them, and shocking number for the country that's got to pay for it. It's too big a
absolutely.
burden.
Absolutely. Now, changing tack slightly, you are a One Nation Tory. What does
Yes.
that mean to you? And do you still think there's a space in the political landscape for One Nation Conservatives?
Well, I have to say, I get a lot of people coming up to me saying, oh, we miss all you lot. And by us lot, they mean about 20 or 30 of us who left at the 2019 election. Not all people who were voted out, no, because 2019, Boris got a good majority, but a lot of us left or had the whip removed and weren't
Mhm.
allowed to stand again. And they were people who'd been very senior in government and had held important roles, but couldn't support Boris's hard Brexit, and he wouldn't put up with it. And to me, the One Nation Tory means thinking about the economy of the country that impacts on everybody. So why we didn't support a no deal Brexit was because we knew it would do tremendous damage to the country. And so we weren't prepared to follow the ideology of that, which is what Brexiters wanted, in order for them to get their true Brexit. What we wanted was a Brexit that felt justifiable in terms of the vote, but also in terms of supporting the country. And that, as a kind of example, is really what One Nation is to me. It's looking across the whole country at making sure that we support people from every walk of life and every different type of skills or knowledge, so that we really are one nation. That was Disraeli's original intent.
Yeah.
And that's really what many of us still feel is relevant now. And whether he's still got a role, I don't know. I'm still I'm a member of the party. I won't be anything else. And I have a lot of friends who take that view. And I get a lot of people saying, "Where are you all? We don't want the kind of the pseudo populists or the actual populists, and we'd like to hear more about a sort of compassionate, thoughtful, non-ideological conservatism. And maybe we will get that more in the future from Conservatives. I certainly hope so."
Yeah. You worked as an investment banker before entering politics. And why did you want to make that shift? And how can we convince more closet conservatives in the private sector to join the party and to stand for Parliament?
I certainly want more people from business to join the party. It's so important. And I can ruin many a West London dinner party when people ask me why they think why are MPs overall, not any party, so awful, and I just say you try it.
Yeah.
We need to encourage people to get out and do it, and then I explain to them some of the positive things I've done and why I do feel proud of the achievements as a minister, and why it's really valuable and important to have people come in and get involved. I think we have to showcase a bit more the positive things you can do, but I can see why people get put off. I mean, there is so much vitriol in
Yeah.
politics. It's not a new thing. I mean, there always was, but it does feel particularly heightened at the moment. And when you get very senior, you are really on the receiving end of a lot of difficult, uh, criticism, really. But I think, again, I always say to people, it's worth it if you believe in what you're doing. Then the prize is worth the difficulty getting there.
Yes, yes, that's it. Somebody's got to do it, is what I always say.
Yeah, somebody's got to do it, exactly.
So, in your maiden speech, you spoke of the plight of British fishermen and the repressive common fisheries policy. What are your thoughts on Labour's UK EU fisheries agreement, which granted EU vessels access to British waters until 2038?
Well, the fisheries policy was one of the areas that the EU debate was fought on. And so many things were promised, which I wanted to tear my hair out because they couldn't be delivered even out of the EU. I would much preferred to have reformed the common fisheries policy from within the EU. And that it's very kind of you to look back at my maiden speech now 15 years ago. That's what I was trying to talk about, even though I had no idea there was a fight for EU membership, on the horizon.
Mm.
But I thought, like many others did at the time, that we could reform it from within. And the fishermen voted. I was representing a fishing town. They all voted for Brexit. They all thought that once we left the EU, everything would be changed and they would get more quota, their legal ability to fish for the product in the seas around them. And to be fair, they did get a bit more. But in the end, our assets are traded as part of a deal with the Europe with our neighbours. You have to work with your neighbours. And if you're working with your neighbours, whether you're in or out of the EU, you're going to be making compromise and making deals, whatever your priorities are, in order to get what you think is most important for the country. So it's disappointing that Labour have done that. But on the other hand, there's an element of kind of Schadenfreude for those of us who said, don't expect this to change much just because we leave the EU. The UK has certain strengths and the certain priorities. We do a lot of fishing here, but we don't eat a lot of the fish. The
Yeah.
fish is eaten in Europe, so we need them to buy it. They need us. They need some of our waters. They want some of our waters. I'd much prefer us to keep our waters and for us to fish in them solely. But there's no point because if they don't buy them, there's no point fishing for them. So in the end, you have to do all these compromises and deals. And one of the challenges of the fisheries conversation during the EU debate was that it was so black and white. Leave the EU, get access to all our fisheries. There is no compromise. So misleading.
Yeah, yeah. And do you think is it the time scale that makes it a bit of an unfair deal because 2038 is so far away, it feels like.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it does feel like it's far away, but it's left sort of a little bit of hope out there for now.
Yeah.
But I think that people should see it for what it is, which is a compromise.
Now, so you work primarily in the energy and cybersecurity sectors, two
Yeah.
incredibly pertinent industries of today. On energy, what change needs to occur to bring down energy prices? Shadow Energy Secretary of State Claire Coutinho suggests removing the carbon tax on bills and repealing the Climate Change Act. What are your thoughts on this?
On the big national interests, why don't you work together? And Climate Change Act of 2008 was obviously promoted by the Labour government, but made more ambitious by the Conservatives in the time in 2008. And then David Cameron and the rest of us campaigned in 2010 on a very pro-green reducing carbon emissions agenda. And I think that was the right thing to do. I think the Climate Change Act is sufficiently versatile that we could do what Claire Coutinho wants to do within it. But she clearly wanted to send a different signal to the public. and to voters, the public, known as the voters,
Yeah.
that she wanted us to get out of climate change. I think it's a mistake because I think investors as well like to see stability,
Mm.
and it's wobbled them a bit that a Conservative Party might be removing ourselves from it. Not as much as, of course, they're wobbled by the idea of reform getting in, but it's I think it's unnecessary in terms of reducing our bills. We always need, as a country, a variety of sources of our energy because you don't know where the pressures are going to come from. Ukraine being invaded by Russia and not being able to frack. That had been a huge part of our plans in 2014, 15. Turned out not to be possible. America. America is now the biggest exporter of gas in the world.
Wow.
Never have thought that 15 years ago. It's absolutely extraordinary. So there's huge amounts of change taking place all the time in energy supplies and amazing innovation as well. So I think that the best thing for a country is to have a variety, to be technology agnostic if you can, in terms of supporting different technologies. Nobody expected solar to be as hugely successful as it's been. The price of solar is absolutely extraordinary the way it's fallen. And in the UK now, typically on an average day, over 50% of our electricity supply is clean, i.e., nuclear, as well as solar, wind, and others. So I think it's been a reasonable success. It's expensive, our energy, partly because we put so many other things on our bills, and many countries choose to put those on tax instead.
Right. So that's what we should really be looking at to kind of
Yeah,
make
well,
that
no, but you're
reduction.
never going to be able to get it, I don't think, in a tough economic climate. You're not going to get a chancellor agree to move it from your bills to your tax. But it is a problem. It is a problem.
Yeah.
But the polling shows that the public still want cleaner energy, and they want more support for biodiversity. They want to have less pollution, and one of the ways to get that is to continue to reduce our carbon emissions. Where I think Ed Miliband goes too far is that he's very focused on the last 5 or 10%, which, like anything in life you do, is much more expensive. For the past sort of 15 years, we've done the easier stuff. I announced abandoning coal in 2015 by 2025, and then it was brought forward to 2023. So and the fact the UK is off coal is fantastic. There are so many things wrong with coal in terms of the environment, but we have to be realistic about this last piece and its cost and the time of which we're going to try and do it. And I think Ed Miliband is too ambitious there.
That's one way of putting it. So on cyber, we've seen a huge number of high-profile attacks in recent months. M&S, Jaguar Land Rover, Heathrow Airport. What should businesses be doing to protect themselves? And do you think cyber is the future of warfare? And will the cybersecurity and resilience bill make any difference?
Well, I hope the bill will make a difference, but the most thing that businesses can do is look after themselves by being prepared for cyber attacks because they are coming at it fast and furious all the time. And as we saw with JLR, can be huge, huge, really impacting a company. And I think it's the first time that I've ever heard a chancellor or Treasury Department refer to the fact that growth was impacted by the impact of this particular cyber attack. And that's one of the reasons for our low growth, which is so interesting. So it's a very serious issue. It should be discussed at board. It's not one of those things which should be parked with Dave or whoever it is in charge of cyber. Chief Executive needs to be talking about it. And the interesting thing about JLI, it's a reminder that the legislation is inadequate at the moment because it talks about data protection. Well, data protection wasn't the issue there.
Right.
Data protection isn't really the issue. The issue is business cessation. They couldn't they couldn't work the
Mm.
machines as a result. And that is what businesses should be focusing on. If they have a cyber attack that gets through, that is successful, the data is an issue, but it's not the big issue. The big issue is, where is your ops room? What are you going to do instead to keep business running while the cyber attack is stopped, examined, and ended? And that is the big challenge for people. And I hope that the new bill will try to put the emphasis back on business operations rather than data. But mostly, this is something that business needs to learn to do itself, to
Yeah.
support itself. And to be fair, most of them do. We have a great organization in the National Cyber Security Centre, which came out of GCHQ, our subsidiary of MI6, which does all the technology. And they are very effective and work closely with business. So they should feel businesses, if they're in touch with National Cyber Security Centre, well supported, which I hope they are.
And going back quickly to Home Secretary, you've held the role and it's not an easy one. How do you think Shabana Mahmood is doing as Home Sec? And do you think her plans will work? And is it critical for the Conservative Party that they do?
Jamila, when I was in government, there were two things I noted when I was Home Secretary and when I was working pensions, that the Labour MPs would not support me when I made changes.
Mm.
So when I went in to the chamber to make changes to reduce, for instance, family reunion rights or to promote, to explain deportation flights, I would get MPs campaigning against me. And in fact, Shabana campaigned against one of the deportation flights as well. Um, and when I was working pensions, I would get people saying, you can't reduce access to PIP because, this is a literal quote, because it was quite upsetting, but it just happens at the time. How many people will it kill, Secretary of State? I was asked. So it's important to remember that whatever the leadership wants to do in terms of cuts or changes, as we have seen, I don't think the Labour MPs will support them.
Yeah.
I think Shabana is doing the right thing to stop illegal immigration.
Mm.
And I think she's looked at an array of things she could do. She could do one, two, three. And instead of doing which politicians often do, which is I'll do one and see if I need to do two, she's just gone for them all. And said, look, if I
Nice.
do all these three, I bet I can stop it. And I hope she does, because stopping illegal migration is so important to people's confidence, day to day confidence in our country, in our rules, in our politicians.
Yeah.
And also, if she stops it, it will take the momentum out of reform
Mm.
and allow the Conservatives to be better heard as well. So those of us who are Conservatives should wish her well in this, as I see Kemi has,
Yeah.
in order to get a proper hearing on what I think is the most important part of being a Conservative, which is supporting the creation of wealth and growth, and then making sure that people can be enterprising to do that themselves, creating the taxes to support all our public services. And that, I feel, is what we're missing in politics at the moment, an explicit support for enterprise.
Yes. And so that brings me on to my penultimate question. Why are you a Conservative?
So I spent a career in business before becoming an MP in 2010. And I was in banking, but I was also in venture capital, which helps people set up businesses, helps people raise money to develop their businesses, creates employment. And really, I think that was the main living experience that propelled me into politics, wanting the country and people supporting growth, creating growth to be partly supported by government, but partly not interfered with
Mm.
by government, so that they could do that. And it's also my immense admiration for people who do that. And you don't get that from any other political party except the Conservatives, because that's kind of the lifeblood of enabling the body politic to succeed.
Yes, absolutely. And what do you love about being a member of the Conservative Party and what gives you hope?
Well, I actually did an event here up in Suffolk, where I'm calling you from, recently, which was explicitly to get people who had been members of the Conservative Party or were interested to rejoin. Because let's face it, we have lost some membership. And to think about centrist Conservatives as a force for good in the Conservative Party. And I mean, it's difficult to say this without sounding too pompous, but I was, I was mobbed. I was overwhelmed by people who
Yeah.
were saying, "Oh, thank God! Let's hear from a voice of somebody who is centrist and passionate about supporting the community and businesses to create that growth." So that gives me hope that there is still a big support by the public, by communities for that. It's just felt a bit squeezed in the past few years.
Yes. Well, Amber, thank you so, so much for joining us today. And please, everyone, do check out her fantastic podcast, The Crisis Room. And thank you so much, Amber.
Jamila, my pleasure.